king of my heart. Be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. He is my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. He is my song. Let the king of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. He is my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Yes, you are good, good. Oh, yes, you are good, good. Oh,
Well, we want to welcome you this great and beautiful Sunday morning here in Estevan, Saskatchewan, here at the Estevan Church of God.
Welcome to Church Online.
Yes, you betcha. We
love
want to
that
just
you joined us.
thank you so much for tuning in and watching and on your devices that you have. We just want to take a few moments just to acknowledge that and give you thanks for taking the time to
we
view us and
appreciate
watch.
it.
We appreciate that.
your-
and
your
again, we love
input
your
and-
comments. We
Yes,
love
we
your
do.
interaction, because one of the things that we find challenging in these times is being able to interact with you, because connection is important. And so
Totally is.
we want to do what we can and allow you the platform to connect with us.
Yes.
Comment as you're watching.
Yeah.
Share this stuff. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. All those
Yes.
stuff helps in some way of
Yes.
whenever we got some new material out there and new
Yeah.
things we're doing, you get the first to recognize it there and you can
Yes.
watch it. And so we're just so thankful. There's a few things that I think is important for us to acknowledge is we've had our sound crew has worked tirelessly, endlessly to make adjustments and come and so that we can have everything well done together. And we just want to acknowledge the sound crew, people behind the cameras. Oftentimes when you sit and watch a program online, very few know what goes behind the scenes.
We don't look this good or sound this good just on our own. We need a whole team, so we just acknowledge our
and so
team
I
around
just
us.
wanted to acknowledge our
Yes.
Estevan crew
Yeah.
that provides the sound, the cameras, the
Yes.
editing, and
the time and the
all that
resources.
stuff.
Yeah.
And we are grateful to you, and we want the rest of you to recognize
Yes.
that there are many people behind these cameras and these scenes
Yes.
to make this happen. And so from
Appreciate
bottom of
that.
my heart, from us, we just want to say thank you for improvising and making these difficult times, navigating times, so that you get the best
And I
possible.
think it's because we value you.
That's important to
Our
understand.
heart is we value you. When you tune in, we value you.
Yes,
and
we do.
we want to connect with you.
Yes.
You are important.
Absolutely.
Every person is important.
So we enjoy that.
Yes.
So we're going to jump right into it here this morning.
Yes.
And last week we started talking a little bit about Joseph. And one of the
Son.
things that I want to tell you, there isn't a Bible character that speaks to me the loudest than Joseph. And what I like about Joseph, and it's important to understand this, is he lived real time.
Yes.
It wasn't about, he didn't know the beginning from the end. All he knew is what was happening in front of him.
Yes.
And one of the things that, especially in times of uncertainty, in places where we have questions and we're navigating through stuff, and we get to the point where we're tired, we're frustrated, we want to see change doesn't seem to happen. And Joseph faced all those things in his life. In fact, his life was even far more extreme than what we often face and go through. And what amazes me, and we want to walk through it the next 20 minutes, or 20 or so minutes, is to really walk through some of the things that made Joseph unique and the tools that he had no matter what he was going through and facing. And I don't know about you,
Yes.
but you are going to be encouraged. You're going to see
Yes.
a perspective that you possibly haven't seen before. And not only that, but you're going to look with different eyes in different
Yes.
lenses, because we can learn from other people's experiences.
Yes.
And we don't always write our own book. We go through our own stuff, but a lot of it can be relatable to other things. And that's what I like about the Bible, is there's so many stories and journeys of people that we can learn from in process.
Yes.
And so
Yeah,
I want to take a few thoughts out of Genesis chapter 39 that we want to talk to you about, just how to navigate or make the most of your circumstances, how to be successful no matter what is in front of us. And I've been saying this for many, many times, and it's worth saying and keep saying, is what we fill ourselves the most with has the greatest influence. So if we fill ourselves with negative and disaster and it's getting worse and it's falling apart, we fill our minds with that, our life tendency shifts in that direction. And one thing I'm learning in my own life, and you can speak to yourself, is there's always another side to the perspective than what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And it's not acknowledging the fact that things are difficult. It's not trying to forget what's happening out there, but it's rather it's flipping and looking at it from another perspective. And I think it's important, especially for us as people of faith, we've got to learn to have balance in our life. Either this way or that way. We've got to learn that our perspective speaks so much into our destiny, into where we're going, because I hear so many people are getting discouraged and are struggling with their mental health because of what's going on, and it's largely because we're focusing our attention on those things that drive that in us. And that's what I like about Joseph's story. Is he takes horrendous circumstances in Joseph's life, and we talked about them a little bit last week, but let's just highlight them a little bit. First of all, he was rejected by his brothers.
Well, I was going to say here, I'm going to call him Joe because I just feel like let's put him into our world right here, because he was living real time.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
He was from a very dysfunctional family.
Very dysfunctional.
Yeah, it was a real family. Yeah, there was stepbrothers and sisters, and they hated him. His dad favored him, and they hated him all the more. Like, it was dysfunction to the core. And some of us can relate to that. We grew up in dysfunction. And
And the thing is about dysfunction is it's not about having it always right. Nobody has it right.
No.
And I think where often dysfunction happens is if we think we're right, we teach what's right, we exemplify what's right, therefore everything is right. But the fact that journey brings out the dysfunction, because we have to learn to navigate through life.
And the reason I said that, I brought up that word, it's not that was the negative, because we think Joe could just go through his journey how he did it, and it wasn't because he had idealistic family growing up. He didn't have,
an idealistic theology.
Exactly.
All those things came into play.
He was a real person with a real mess around his life, walking it through.
And when I see that,
I
see that, it gives me hope.
Totally, it does.
That even in my mess, my struggles, my insecurities, the things that aren't going in my favor, that they don't have to define me.
No, absolutely.
They don't have to shape my destiny. They don't have to move me to the point where I get off of what God's best is for my life. And Joseph is a prime example of that. In Genesis chapter 39, a lot of things have happened to Joseph up until this point. First of all, Joseph was rejected by his brothers. In fact, hated by his brothers, and they always made fun of him, and they always wanted to push him out of their life. And his brothers had an opportunity to get rid of Joseph, and as a result, did get rid of him. Sold him to Midianite traders. Sold him.
I know some of you want to do that with your siblings sometimes. Let's sell them.
Sometimes, you know what the reality is? Sometimes we think if that problem or that person we get rid of that person, then everything else will be okay.
Our life will be way
but
easier.
How did Joseph's brothers feel? When they got rid of what they thought the problem was, their problem still was consistent in their life, because it wasn't about the person. It was about internal, what was going on inside.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes we think we can cut off people, cut off situations, and there needs to be time for that. But if we look to cutting off certain people or cutting off things as the answer, that's not necessarily the answer, because it's internal.
Absolutely.
It's something on the inside.
And that's what we see with Joseph's life. And we want to actually get into some really powerful points. And we're like, how did Joseph do that? How did he? It is
so in
a
Genesis
powerful
39,
story.
He's already sold, and Potiphar bought Joseph on the open market. He was a slave. He bought him and put him to work. And
didn't know the language. Didn't know
the
anybody,
culture. He was taken out of his home. Everything was unfamiliar for Joseph. If anything could go wrong with him and his perspective, it would have been now. It would have been when his brothers pushed him aside, and he had to work through a lot of that stuff. But now he was sold, and he was brought to a country that wasn't even his own. Didn't know the language, didn't know, like we said. And here Joseph was, given the circumstances that he had.
Yes.
And what amazes me, there's 3 points that we want to bring out this morning. And the first thing we want to highlight is we need to understand that in the midst of his difficulties and upside down circumstances,
Yeah.
the Lord was with Joseph.
Yes.
In Genesis 39, it says several times in the midst of his circumstances, it says, first of all, in 39 verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. And then it says, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master.
Wow.
So it says there in verse 2 that the Lord was with him. And then again, when the circumstance twisted even further,
Yes.
Potiphar's wife began to have a thing for Joseph
Yeah.
and wanted him.
Yeah.
And Joseph fled. And in that midst of that fled, Potiphar's wife didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So she accused him that he came on to me.
Yeah.
Potiphar heard that, got extremely angry,
Yep.
and threw him in prison.
Yeah. He
And,
is.
and not just any prison. We have to understand the culture of that day. The prison that Joseph was put into were the political prisoners. It was the prisoners that the government opposed or felt was a threat.
Wow.
So he was put in where the prisoners of the
Yes.
government were put
Yeah.
in place.
In the dungeon.
And there he was. But again, we read in verse 21, in the midst of those things, it says again, but the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him favor.
Wow.
And then we read on further, and in the midst of that, in verse 22, before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison, because the warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. And then it says again, and the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed.
Wow.
It's important for us to understand that the Lord was with Joseph, because many times when we go through struggles,
Yeah.
we face unprecedented circumstances.
Yeah.
All too often, myself included, we feel like we're alone.
Yes.
We're abandoned.
Yes.
And many times, especially if you're in a faith movement or growing up in the church, many times we question where God is.
Yeah.
And when I look at Joseph's circumstances, I see he could have seen from another perspective and seen he was abandoned, left alone, and
Yes.
now in prison, left to rot.
Yes. Yeah.
But yet, 3 times, and the Lord was with Joseph.
And
the
Joseph
Lord was with Joseph.
must have known it. He must have known God's favor is on my life. God is with me.
Yes.
God hasn't forsaken me.
No.
Because we read a lot of stories in Scripture where they say that God's forsaken me, I'm done. And they live in that reality.
Yes, because
even
that's
though-
what's most dominant in
Yes.
them.
Joseph knew something, honey, that we've got to know
In the midst of our circumstances.
in our journey, in the dysfunctional family.
It says in Genesis 39, and God was with Joseph.
Yeah.
And then in each time it says, and gave him success in whatever he did, or his favor was on him.
So, what does success look like?
That's the question that I have written down in my notes.
Yep.
How do we define success?
Yes.
Because on one side of the coin, he was discarded,
Yes. And
left alone, carrying all the burden of people telling that he failed, he couldn't measure up, he was rejected,
Yeah.
he was a problem, he was a menace.
yeah, you don't belong in this family.
don't belong.
You get out. Yeah, you're nothing.
And yet in the
worth
midst of it,
nothing
it
to
says,
us.
and gave him success. And each illustration that
Yeah.
followed,
Yeah.
what amazes me, and I think this is a key here, is Joseph's attitude was one of being faithful with whatever isn't put in front of him.
Did you
So
hear
when
that?
he went into Pharaoh's home
Yeah.
as a sold slave,
Yeah.
honored Pharaoh,
Potiphar.
and made the most of his
Yes.
circumstances, served and honored him,
Yeah.
and as a result, Potiphar promoted him.
Yes.
And oftentimes I think in life, oh, now it's finally coming in my favor.
Everything's lining up.
It's all lining up.
It's
You
all
see, I have to
lining
make
up.
right
Now I
choices.
can-
I believe the best of God, all these things, and it'll come to you. And here Joseph was raised to the level he was in charge of Potiphar's household,
Yeah.
and then crash.
Yeah.
He was lied about. His
Yes.
circumstances turned worse.
Yeah.
Again, we can ask the question where God is. But yet in prison, and God was with Joseph.
Yes.
What did Joseph do in the midst of those circumstances? He again made the most of what was in front of him. He didn't gloat in the fact that everything was down and underneath.
Yes.
He didn't constantly program his mind to thinking he was a victim. All this injustice is happening to him. What is going on with my life? But he began to serve the warden.
Yeah.
And the warden recognized God's hand on Joseph's life, and before you know it, Joseph was in charge of the prison.
Yeah.
Nothing happened without
So he
Joseph.
took
What was
handed
handed
to him,
Oh,
and he made the best of that opportunity. He was faithful. He didn't poor me. He made the best and was faithful
Absolutely.
with where he was at.
If we often think that God moving according to our theology or our ideals and what we think should happen, if we think that's success, God doing this, my theology is intact, and I believe the right things necessarily and hold to the right things, and
then
my
everything's-
ideals are met, oftentimes we associate that as success.
Yes.
And yet you look at Joseph's life,
Yes.
the opposite was happening,
Yeah.
yet he was being promoted and promoted
Yes.
and promoted because his perspective was, I'm going to make the most of the circumstances.
Yes.
It's almost like he lived with a higher intent than just simply surviving and
Yes.
having praise from man. He was faithful. I wrote down on my notes here at one point that he was unmovable, unshakable, regardless of what happened.
Yes.
What difference would that make if we understood that?
Yeah.
I want that a reality in my life, and we know
Yes.
that reality is ours
Yeah.
when we allow God's principles and His Word to come alive in us.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what happens around us. We can be unmovable and unshakable
Yes.
and serve in the midst of what we're put into.
Yeah.
The Lord was with Joseph.
Yes.
The second thing I think is important. And what is the second thing?
He refused to play the victim. He refused to play the.
Sometimes I like playing the victim because
Oh
it
yeah,
makes me
sometimes
feel
we
good.
we feel a little bit better when we just sit in the mud, and then we want other people to join us.
That's what often happens.
That's the thing. We want to invite people to our pity party, and not saying that we recognize not everything is right in our world, or that people have not hurt us, or accused us, or whatever, betrayed us. But he understood something. When you look at Joseph's life, he understood something.
Something was moving him.
Inside, he knew a truth. And I have to say the power of grace, because I know we mentioned it last Sunday about knowing that grace is already ours.
Yes.
We don't earn it. We don't have to have the circumstances perfect to get it and walk in it. It is ours. Joseph understood something about grace.
He did, yeah.
And the power of it, because he knew he had the favor of God despite what people were doing, what people were saying, where he ended up. He had the grace of God on him.
The amazing thing is that we were talking just before we came here.
Yes.
And there was a statement you said, and it had something to do with when we live out of grace, we cause others to prosper. When we live out of grace, it's interesting. Joseph never made it about himself.
Yes.
He never made it about his favor. He never made it about his promotion. He never made it about his easy sailing. He never made it about circumstances going in his favor. But what he did do is he lived out of grace in the midst of his circumstances. He gave grace to Potiphar. And as a result, Potiphar prospered.
Can you imagine?
And it tells us in Genesis 39 that Potiphar noticed and realized the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. And then the following verses says it pleased Potiphar so much that he put Joseph in charge of everything.
And guess what? And now Joseph in charge of everything caused Potiphar to prosper in every way.
And then when he was flipped and put into prison because of the lie that was happening in Potiphar's home, the warden noticed that Joseph, and all of a sudden he promoted him because Joseph served the warden, gave him grace. And as a result, things prospered in prison.
Yes.
He didn't live for what it, I want to promote myself.
I'm getting something here. Grace is the doorway.
It is.
To success. And the thing is, what if Joseph would have played the victim? If Joseph would not have walked in the grace for himself, knowing he had grace and favor of God, and he would have played the victim, he wouldn't have prospered. Potiphar wouldn't have prospered. Right. And you know what? When you play the victim, you don't want Potiphar to prosper.
That's right.
You don't want that person who has actually bought you as a slave to prosper. You want their demise.
You want their justice.
You want justice. You want people to know that you're a victim. Joseph didn't do that.
That's what makes living for the kingdom at a whole different level than just living on earth.
Yes.
Because do I want my enemies to prosper? No, I want them to be brought to justice.
I was going to use a word I probably shouldn't say. For sure not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you live a life of grace, you cause those around you to prosper.
Yes.
Jesus is a prime example.
Yes.
He gave grace, and a result of his grace, we prosper.
And because when you know grace, you can give grace.
Absolutely.
When you experience grace, you can give it.
Absolutely.
And it is powerfully freeing.
Absolutely. So the second thing is he refused to play the victim.
Yes.
One, the Lord is with Joseph. I'm going to tell you this morning, if you're tuned in this morning, you are not alone. The Lord is with you.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't recognize it because our eyes are focused on the things that are going wrong rather than focusing on what God is speaking and doing around us, because he's very much alive and working. We're not waiting for revival. Revival is happening. We just have to learn to recognize what God is doing in lives of people.
You know what I think of Joseph?
Midst of circumstances.
Because Joseph changed his world. Like, I'm serious, but it was from inside.
He was so faithful and lived a life of grace that people prospered in front of him.
Yes.
That two of Pharaoh's key servants were put in prison.
Yeah.
And they all had dreams.
Yeah.
And Joseph interpreted those dreams.
Yeah.
And as a result, 2 years later, so Joseph would have been in prison, I think, 11 or 12 years at this point.
Yeah.
And then Pharaoh had a dream.
And who's Pharaoh?
Pharaoh was the king and the leader of entire Egypt.
Yes.
And he had a dream, and it so bothered him, and his sorcerers and his all these things could not figure out.
He's looking for answers.
He was looking for answers.
Yeah.
And then one of the people that were in prison that was brought back into Pharaoh's court said, I remember. There's a guy named Joseph.
Yeah.
And that day, Joseph's life changed. He met Pharaoh for the first time.
But did it change? The thing is, he was already free inside.
I'm saying that he changed in the sense of all of a sudden now he had an opportunity to bring grace to Pharaoh.
Wow.
And he even said in Genesis 42, I think, that I don't interpret, but God does. You tell me what your dream was, and I'll be able to tell you. And he told him the dream, and as a result of his grace and giving life. You see, oftentimes Joseph could have put it in a spot. Now you're dealing with the prime minister, the president.
Yeah.
Dealing with Pharaoh, the highest authority in government.
Yeah.
And Joseph never mentioned, I've been rejected.
Injustice.
There's been injustice.
Yeah.
My voice has been silent, all these things. But rather, he gave Pharaoh grace. And he ministered to him and began to speak from heaven's perspective. And as a result, Pharaoh then promoted Joseph to be second in charge of the entire country.
Yes.
Not because that's what Joseph's purpose was.
Yeah.
His purpose was to be faithful. If he would have played the victim, he would have stayed in his circumstances and never seen the delivery and the perspective that he did. He refused to play the victim.
Wow, that is so
continued
powerful.
to give grace. The last thing, and we're going to close with this, is he chose to forgive and excel through it all.
Wow.
What amazes me, and this is something I had to learn, I don't forgive easy. I got to work on it. Because my mindset is they need to pay. But when I live a life of grace, it's not about paying. It's about liberating and freeing.
Yes.
And Joseph chose to forgive his brothers.
Yes.
That started this whole thing.
Yes.
He chose to forgive Potiphar.
Yeah.
He chose to forgive Potiphar's wife.
Yes.
He chose to forgive Pharaoh.
Yes.
And as a result, he was given a platform that he was able to run with what was going on in his life.
And to think, this is real time. Joseph lived every part of this. And I just want to say, he was in a place of authority where he could actually bring all the justice, the injustice, he could have dealt with it all in his place of authority.
Yes.
He could have gone, and he came face to face with his brothers, the ones who started his hell of a journey and caused all of this life of struggle.
He could have done
retribution.
Retribution all the way through his life, because now he had the authority to do it.
Yes, and he came
But
face to face.
he was a grace person. And when he came face to face with his brothers during the famine, he seen his brothers show up to Egypt to buy grain.
Yep.
And the Bible tells us Joseph recognized his brothers.
He knew who they were.
He knew it. They didn't recognize him,
No.
but he recognized them.
Yes.
And he offered grace.
Wow. Can I just read that?
Yeah.
Because when he told his brothers in the room, face to face, and he says, I'm Joseph, and they couldn't quite grasp it, he said, come closer. I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold. Don't feel badly. Don't even blame yourselves for selling me. God was behind it. And God sent me here ahead of you to save not only your lives, but the lives of... It was a global famine. It was huge. Everybody around the world was coming to Egypt. God sent me here to save lives. So for what you meant for my harm, God has turned it all for good. He had no animosity. Blows my mind, because he saw that God was with him through his rejection, through his whole journey, and he knew something about grace, that God was going to turn it all for good. Wow.
God was with him.
Yes.
He refused to play the victim,
Yeah.
and he chose to forgive
Yeah.
and excel through it all.
Wow.
I don't know what more we can say.
And we don't know what you've gone through.
We don't. All of us are going through something.
Yeah.
And we just want to speak hope into your life,
Yeah.
into the very heart of your being.
Yeah.
God loves you.
Yeah.
He's got a plan and purpose for your life, and he will never, ever leave you.
Yeah.
He will walk you through what you're going through.
Yes.
He's going to begin to instill in you a victimless perspective.
Yes.
Where you walk about your life as a victor.
Wow.
Regardless of the circumstance. I speak that right now into your life.
Yes.
That what you're going through and what you're navigating through, that God's picture of who he sees you and what he's doing around you would become so clear and so great that your perspective would be shaken and opened up to see the reality and the power of God in your life.
Yes.
And I speak that victimness, I speak that you would refuse to play this victim, because when you see through the eyes and the lens of grace,
It's powerful.
all we see is opportunity.
Yes. Wow.
Encourage you, choose to forgive those that have hurt you. It not only frees you, but it opens up the window where you live out of grace, and you see those around you not as threats, but as opportunities for them to prosper, because you're giving something from the kingdom.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. This wasn't a great lesson. It might be a little bit longer. We apologize, but we encourage you.
Yes.
If you would take the time, read Genesis 39.
Yeah. All the way to 40, 50.
All the way to 50.
It's
Those
just got the whole
chapters, get the
story.
whole story in there
Powerful.
of how God uses us
Yeah.
in the most difficult of circumstances of life.
Yes.
Thank you
Have
again.
an
Have a
awesome
great morning.
Sunday.
It's an honor to be with you in your homes, in your vehicles, or wherever your devices are. We just want to bless you. You are important to us.
Yes.
We value, and God bless you this morning.
See ya.
See you.